Coming up next, the Bookening reads East of Eden. Welcome to the Bookening. My name is Nathan Alverson, your humble and obedient host. I'm here with Jake Menzel. Hello, Jake.
Hello, Nathan.
And Brandon Chasteen.
Hello, Nathan.
And we are going to talk about East of Eden some more today in our spoiler-filled episode. Yay! But first we want to give a shout-out to Burl. He helped us with some sound engineering stuff.
Thanks, Burl.
Thank you, Burl.
Burl's not nodding his head because he can't hear.
Yeah.
He has no idea. We just gave him a shout out.
No.
We can tell him when we're done.
All right, let's talk about the Hamiltons. You guys ready to talk about the Hamilton family?
Yes.
Let's do it.
I thought we might divide it up by families. Talk about these characters first, because I like to gossip about characters. So let's talk about the Hamilton family. And we might as well dive right into the deep end with Mr. Samuel Hamilton himself. Prophet. Irishman.
Poet.
Closet drunk.
Ne'er-do-well.
Ne'er-do-well. What'd you guys think about Samuel Hamilton?
I loved him. I still do.
What did you love about Samilton? What did you love about
What do you got in that drink there?
Hamilton. Samuel
My name
Samilton.
is Samuel. I don't know. It's hard to put it into words. He's larger than life.
Yeah.
He's a lover and a poet and a gentleman and a scholar and a bunch of other really ridiculous things. I don't know.
Does he play his music in the sun? Do people call him Maurice? Sorry, go ahead. Samuel Hamilton. What did you guys think about old Samuel Hamilton?
He's this larger-than-life figure. I loved him. To me, he just is like, he is the middle, the heart of the novel. Everything stops when you meet Samuel Hamilton. The Trask family saga stops in my mind, and everything goes in slow motion. He's just alive. He's a man alive to the world. He's alive to the cosmos. He's alive to what it means to be a man. He sees things that nobody else in the novel see. Because he has insight into himself, he has tragedy in his own past. He has a wisdom paired with a real jolliness that I think Steinbeck would say that only an Irishman can have.
Mm-hmm. He is a bit of an Irish stereotype.
Yeah, he is.
Well expressed and three-dimensional. But he fits the comical Irishman type as well. What are you going to say?
Very colorful character with great humor over the top of a well of sorrow and experience and real joy, but real wisdom, I think.
Yeah, to an extent he is a stereotype, but this book plays a lot with stereotypes and then breaks those stereotypes. Shows you that there's truth to them, but then there's also depth to them that has to be mined.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's something interesting about the characters. I would say all of the characters are
types.
They're all types. They're all types.
Yeah.
And yet they're all, it's sort of a magic thing that he pulls off where you're dealing with types that are really broad, and yet you do feel like they're real people. One of the things that I thought was strange was that Samuel was one of the only characters that I could actually carry a visual picture of in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
I know what Samuel Hamilton looks like. I know what Tom Hamilton looks like. I'm not sure I could tell you what Adam Trask looks like, at least comparatively. In my mind, he jumps off the page as a real larger-than-life person.
Well, in a sense, Adam Trask is us.
Right.
And Samuel Hamilton is every awesome professor, father, uncle.
Yeah.
We've all had a Samuel Hamilton in our life, and if you haven't, then you are not very well blessed.
Yeah, it's
You know,
too bad.
Yeah. Sucks to be
Sad
you.
life.
What were you going to say, Brandon?
Oh, about the stereotype?
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, there's this sense of foreignness about him. I think when he's first introduced, he's introduced as being foreign, right? And he had to overcome that because all the men in the town were afraid that with his jolliness and his knowledge, he might even steal away their wives.
Mm-hmm.
But then they realized that that's not who Sam Hamilton was, and so instead he becomes sort of this oracle position where all the men will come. They'll bring to him their machines that need fixed, but actually what they're doing is they're coming to get his stories, they're coming to get his wisdom and his counsel. Yeah, he takes on this larger-than-life position in the novel. Everybody in the novel kind of has a type. You know, so part of the thing we have to deal with is that a lot of allegory is happening in the novel. And yet, how we're supposed to parse that and understand the allegory. So you said he was the prophet.
Yeah.
And he is. He has the prophet position. He's the one who punches, we're doing spoilers now, right?
Yes, absolutely.
He's the one who punches Adam in the face, right? And
Fantastic scene.
yeah, one of the best scenes of the novel.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He's the one who names the boys, right? Or at least causes the naming of the boys.
He draws out the
Yeah.
names,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And
Yeah. And so he does a lot of this prophetic giving of names, snapping people out of their funk, right? That these prophets would do for David in the Bible.
And the
And,
satanic character, Kathy, recognizes and hates him without any
Yeah.
reason.
and is
She
afraid
just-
of him.
She just
She's afraid
knows
of him.
this guy's against me and bites into his hand when he tries to deliver. She's just like animalistic. It's like a demon coming across Jesus or something like that. It's that level of just
Yeah, they recognize each other.
they recognize each other.
Yeah, and they recognize each other as enemies.
Yeah.
He recognizes her as an enemy. It's when he comes and visits and they have dinner for the first time, right?
Mhm.
And she comes to the table and then he's walking home or riding home and he's trying to remember what it is about her.
Yeah,
And
he
then it has to do with the eyes. The eyes are dead. The eyes,
goes to that flashback of the hanging.
yeah,
Mhm.
of the villain who's in his father. And a telling scene for his past. You know, he had a very warm father who didn't want him to see this.
Yeah.
I love the fact that we don't know about his past and that it's just this colorful, people think maybe, I don't know what it says about that, but he's got this whole story.
Yeah, he's got emotions and feelings that are hard to rein in. So he comes out in his son Tom, who
Yeah.
is completely unable to control himself like his father was able to control himself. But then you
At
get
one
the sense
point,
that
yeah, Tom's described as just smashing his head against the world or something
Yeah.
like that. Everywhere he turns, he hits everything with full force, and that's Samuel. But Samuel has more restraint, or he has some moderation that Tom doesn't have.
it's hard to find places in this book. But is there a spot where it says that Sam had like humor and an ability to laugh at things that Tom didn't have, and that was part of it, a levity and a lightness?
It's definitely there, whether it
Yeah.
explicitly
Yeah.
says that.
Yeah, he talks about. There's that one place where he talks about he's comparing and contrasting Sam and Tom, and so he talks about how Samuel could, when he read a book, he would surf over the top of it, and
Yeah.
and when Tom read a book, he would burrow down into it and mine it and come up covered in grime and dirt and the weight of it.
And it would take days for him to get over it, while Sam, he could pass over it and
Take it in and absorb it, but he was never really. You get the sense that he did internalize it. It was real. It wasn't superficial surfing, but it was also there was a part of his character that was not so easily. He was always Sam, and Tom was always so deeply affected that he could be wrecked by anything.
Sam wasn't as consumed by his feelings and his emotions. He could deal with them. He could handle them. So there's the scene where he's talking to Lee, and Lee, it's the pivotal moment of the book where Tim Schul comes up, and he says that Lee has overturned his world, and he doesn't know. He's going to have to go and he's going to have to think it over. Lee has basically exploded his world. But it doesn't stop Samuel from being Samuel in the way that it would have stopped Tom from being Tom.
Yeah, yeah. Tom's world would have ground to a halt, and
Yeah.
he would not have been able to function.
He would have laid on his bed staring at the wall, which
Right.
is exactly what happens.
Well, the nice thing about Samuel, I think, is that one of the admirable and lovable things about him is that he treats everything with a light touch. He doesn't have a sense of self-importance about himself. He does feel prophetic in that, or he feels like a prophet, and that it's never about him. He's always helping other people.
Mm-hmm.
He's always there, for whatever reason, for an undefined reason, really. He's just going to help Adam, going to selflessly give to Adam.
Liza's always telling him to leave Adam alone, and there's a line in there somewhere that says that it wasn't in Samuel to leave a man alone who was sorrowing or in agony or pain. He just didn't have it in him to not help.
He had to be invested. He had to go and play
had to
his
do
part.
something.
And
this is one of the sweetest. I feel like I'm going to be saying one of the best scenes or sweetest scenes of the whole book all the time as we go through. So they're probably like 50 best scenes, but really that scene with Liza and Sam where she tells him to go.
She gets out the other
Just
Bible.
that whole part from the minute that Samuel hears that the boys don't have names up through that conversation over Ngapi or whatever.
Another, apropos of nothing perhaps, the thing that sticks out to me about Samuel is that it's so rare for a literary character, in terms of technique, for a character to have that much exposition before we get a real scene with them. That's not necessarily rare, but what's rare is for the character to live up to their billing. He's described as a comical genius. He's described as a wise and inventive and colorful man. Steinbeck creates this character that you have a really strong idea of. And even reading the novel the second time, I was like, there's no way once Sam Hamilton comes on scene, I remember him being a vivid character, but there's no way he lives up to how Steinbeck spends chapters billing him.
I remember having the same feeling of how is he going to pull off.
Right, because it would require Steinbeck to be a comical genius.
Which
and
he
Steinbeck
doesn't seem to
wise.
be.
Right, but he
At
pulls
least at
off
that point.
evoking that character. We don't get to see, perhaps because it's not Steinbeck's gift, we don't get to see his comical genius come out. But we get the sense of how it would have been and what it was and what made him funny. We get the sense of, and I think he completely lives up to his billing, which is just amazing. A good counterpart. We don't have to get into talking about Kathy yet, but Kathy is a character that is billed a certain way, and I don't know that she can live up to how she's billed.
Because of how she was billed, I ended up spending, I think, the whole second half of the novel just waiting for her to bring tragedy and train wreck into the picture. She was going to get Adam. She was going to get to Adam through Cal or Aaron. She was going to do something to get, and it never really happened. She's there in the background, and she's always kind of there hanging over your head, but she doesn't end up playing that large of a direct role, at least.
But we'll talk about Kathy a little bit later.
We'll talk about it later.
I only bring her up to mention there's an example of an interesting interplay with the way that she's billed and the exposition that's given, and then the actual scenes that we have with her feel not quite like I would have expected. But Samuel Hamilton is every inch the man that Steinbeck tells us he's going to be in the exposition.
Well, a large part of the second half of the novel is the fallout of Samuel Hamilton's death and the way that his influence still carries on through these other characters. And so I would say that a large part of the way Kathy is presented in the last half of the novel comes with the fact that Adam kind of defeats her by becoming Samuel Hamilton when he visits that one time and pulling a Sam on her. He just smiles at her and goes his way.
Yeah, really. He figures something out. Sam pops on the scene in the middle of the book, and then when he dies, he haunts the rest of the book.
Yeah,
and that's sort of why I found myself thinking of Elijah and Elisha, because what ends up happening is Lee's always there, and he's always an insightful figure, but Lee grows into, I think, Samuel's role in the book, and so as the second half progresses, our references to Samuel become diminished, and Lee begins to take on more and more and more of that prophetic role, Sam's role, up until the very end. Sort of, you have those scenes with Cal and Adam where Lee's doing exactly what Sam did in the middle with the naming of the kids and pulling Adam out of the muck. He's going to pull the Trask family up. And
there are a lot of parallels throughout this book. One thing that Samuel's always doing is he's play acting this role. He knows he has to do this, and it's insightful and it's good counsel for us as well. So when he goes and he punches Adam, he admits that he's just putting that on. It's not him.
Did I do well?
Yeah, it's so sweet.
Yeah, he's doing.
Well, and he's always
I found it completely comical the whole time. He's like beating him. He's shouting things that are almost. They sound sort of poetic and sort of nonsensical.
Right.
And
I had to slow down. And I was wondering what's he saying?
Yeah. What is he trying to do? And then he finally gets done. And did I do it right? Yeah. I just thought it was a really sweet moment.
To get to your point with Elijah and Elisha, did you pick up on when Lee at the end, he has to stand up and he pretends he's going to fight?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So he's realized that he has to play act too.
Yeah.
And it's effective.
Believe that he didn't have to.
And
actually,
Lee took a book from Samuel Hamilton, the Marcus Aurelius, I think it was, which is a sweet little moment that Sam must have known, the only person in a million years that could have stolen this thing was Lee. But I think it's very sweet how much, it is an Elisha type thing where Lee knows that Samuel Hamilton is the man that he needs to become in some ways for the sake of the family and for the sake of himself.
And he's willing to do that for other people. Whether or not he's always effective, even like with his own children, is another question.
Right.
Samuel, you mean?
Yeah.
Samuel. Yeah.
He has many failings, and in a lot of ways he has overtones of Mr. Bennett from Austin, right? But he's succeeding in ways that Mr. Bennett failed.
Well, I think he really does love Liza.
He does. Yeah, they have a have a good marriage.
I love their marriage. I think
it's beautiful that he had this moment in his youth that still, because he's a poet and emotional and can't get over things, still haunts him, and yet. You get every sense that he's
determined to be a good husband.
Yeah, he's faithful to Liza. He doesn't visit these whorehouses that all these other guys visit.
He doesn't, as is expected of him, seduce every woman in the valley, which he could.
Oh, he could.
Absolutely. Loves and adores his children. He fails with them.
Yeah.
And he doesn't really ultimately equip them for life without him. But I don't want to fault him in any. I don't know.
I think his failures
I haven't gotten too far into what are his.
His failures are the failures of an exuberant, poetical man. And I know people like that. I think of all that as a way in which he rings very psychologically true, apart from just being this archetype or this mythical prophet figure. It makes sense to me how Sam's children end up, even the ones, which is maybe more than half of them that don't end up having what you'd call a happy ending. Yeah. It's at least half of them that don't. Yeah. Or even the ones like Will Hamilton, who just kind of resents his family a little bit and ends up being a very stodgy businessman and
not likable very much at all until the moment where Cal comes to visit him.
And even there, you don't know how much he's just recognizing a fellow jerk and making some money.
Steinbeck gives him a little bit there, though.
Does Steinbeck give him a little bit there?
Yeah, I think he does.
I'll try to find it.
Yeah. Try to find that, and we'll talk about Will in a second. What was you guys' favorite Samuel Hamilton moment? Sounds like you already said yours, Jake.
Oh, it's where he punches Adam.
Where he punches Adam, that scene.
That whole, just him shouting poetry like he's howling at the moon.
Right.
And then they embrace, and then, did I do it right? Yeah. It was just, I just thought that was such a sweet moment. And I would want, though, as a moment to pair that with the scene with Liza before he goes, because I thought that was a really sweet scene. Given the difficulties of their relationship and their marriage, the ways that they have made it work kind of shine through in that moment in a sweet way too. So.
Yeah, that's the thing that I think makes Liza and Samuelton. I keep calling him Samuelton. What's sweet about their marriage is that neither one of them seems bitter about it. They understand that they are completely different kinds of people. Not maybe even the people in the very back of their heads. Maybe they even think, is this the person I would have chosen? But instead of, the Bennetts are an excellent contrast, Brandon. I think Samuel Hamilton is a man that could easily say, I was romantic and look at what I got. I got this religious, stodgy Puritan of a wife that I have to sneak out to my barn to have a drink.
She doesn't share my joys. She doesn't share my books. She doesn't share my love of all these things. He could have easily gone that direction, and yet he was big enough to fit her. And humble enough to see and recognize her strengths and what she brought to him and to the children, and
that first or second time he meets Kathy, one of the things that he realizes he's got to do is he needs his wife's wisdom. He needs his wife to come because he's fully capable of seeing ghosts, but if Liza sees a ghost, it's a real ghost. And that sort of thing where he's come to value and appreciate who normally you would see to be a very two-dimensional, unappreciated, or difficult to appreciate sort of character. It's really...
Yeah, he appreciates her, and Steinbeck easily could have made her out to be some horrible character that it would be easy to despise her in her hardness and her coldness. But he gives her warmth through the love of her husband and through the wisdom that she gives to him.
Yeah,
and
I
the
think
care that she has for her children.
Compare her to, because there's a couple of these women, like Cyrus Trask, it says a man used up a lot of wives, and he has these, he has his first wife who's a religious kind of type, and gets syphilis from him, from Cyrus sleeping with a prostitute, and then she goes and drowns herself. And I guess it's not funny, but it's kind of funny. She goes and drowns herself in a puddle, and thinks about how bad the linen's going to look when they find her body. So you've got her. That's a bad example of that type of woman. And then you've got Liza, who's just a practical, somewhat cold perhaps, but just a really practical woman, and exactly the woman that wildly impractical man like Samuel Hamilton needs.
Yeah, without Liza, the family doesn't survive.
I love the depiction of her.
Sam starves.
She makes chicken for all the funeral guests, and you know she just never stops. And
yeah, she's a very capable woman. Their home is clean. They're well cared for, and it's not because of Samuel; it's because of her. And she doesn't hate him. She doesn't bicker about him. She puts up with him.
She bickers.
Well, she bickers at him.
She gets great pleasure out of bickering at him. But
not married, so I can't speak. But most of the married couples that I enjoy spending time with have a relationship that's a little bit like that. I don't know. I don't know. If I try to expound on it, I'll probably mess it up. But I'll give it a shot.
Give it a shot.
Give it a shot. I enjoy...
Tim Schul.
Yes, Tim Schul. Thou mayest. I enjoy the fact that they've made it work, that they have a sense of humor, or that he has a sense of humor, and that she has a sense of humor through not nagging his sense of humor into the dust about their relationship.
Yeah.
And I think that's very sweet. There's just a lack of bitterness. The fact, of course she knows that he goes out and has a drink,
She ends up becoming something of an alcoholic by the end of her life anyway.
Yeah, exactly. And then they're both finally prepared to go live with the kids and spend their last days. If she was the nutty religious stereotype that you're afraid she's going to be, then I think she'd want to stay on that land that... and just be silent and deferential, like one of the Mrs. Trasks, one of Adam's mothers. But she's more three-dimensional than that. Yeah. And I like her little scene with the parrot at the end when Adam goes and sees her the last time that we meet her, and she's trying to get the parrot to drop its body language. And
a sweet touch.
Yeah, that's just a really funny touch.
Yeah.
A sweet touch, yeah. Mm-hmm. But that parrot. It's like... she had Samuel back in her life. Somebody else to love and slightly be frustrated by.
Right. The only other thing I thought might be worth discussing about Samuel Hamilton is that in reading the book for a second time, I don't know whether you guys felt this reading it the first time, but there was a sense in which the story doesn't really get started until Samuel kicks the bucket. And I'm guessing none of us have seen the movie version,
right?
But it's pretty clear from watching the trailer for the James Dean movie version from the 50s that story probably doesn't even feature Samuel Hamilton, or if it does, he's just in a flashback or something like that, because the story is the story of Cal and Aaron. And if you were just writing the straight-ahead soap opera, Kroger, supermarket bestseller version of this, it is the Cal and Aaron story. And
you might get some flashbacks in it. But
you might get some flashbacks. Maybe you'd have your Obi-Wan figure, show up to do a little bit or something. But there is a sense in which the mechanics of the plot and the hooks that drive you through the story, the main story, don't really take off until Samuel Hamilton is dead. It's almost like the story can't get going until that rock has been thrown into the pool, and those ripples, like Brandon was talking about, have started to affect everybody, and Samuel Hamilton's magic has started to work on everybody. That's when the story finally gets punched. Do you guys agree, disagree?
Yeah, I do agree. I think the other side of that is that so long as Samuel Hamilton's alive, every story is going to gravitate towards him. He's just that large and magnetic of a character, and he's also our storyteller's beloved grandfather, and so he's gonna have that weight at the middle, and then finally, once you as a storyteller can put your grandfather to rest, then you can start telling the story that you came to tell.
You also get the sense that, I mean, you have to wonder where he got the story from. And if he got it from Samuel, then of course Samuel is going to figure prominently into these early part of the novel, because he's the one who is telling the story through his grandchild. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it doesn't bother me that he's such a prominent figure.
No, I love every moment we get to spend with him.
Yeah.
I can see why a critic, I wouldn't agree with this critic, but I can see why a critic would say the novel lacks unity, in that Samuel Hamilton and his function, it almost feels like it's drawing us away from
it is.
some of the other functions of the novel.
It absolutely
is. And I'm okay with that tension.
So what?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So what? The novel, it's a big, sprawling novel about multiple families and these themes of fathers and sons, and it carries through his family as well. And you get these little, like we were saying, the eddies at the side of the river with his son Tom, and then you with Desi and his children. But those still in some way push the story forward. And you, I don't know, I'm interested to know what you guys thought of that. Tom and Desi's aside, almost.
Well, let's get into, first of all, does anybody want to say anything else right now about Samuel or Liza specifically?
I'm not a big Mumford and Sons fan, but I remember that they had a song called Timshel. And then so I played it, and there's a middle verse of that song. I don't know it well enough to quote it, but the part of that song that did make me emotional was the part where I heard Samuel in it. And I think that there's a reality to the fact that despite my attachment to the other characters, the one character that I feel the loss of, or am going to miss the most, going to wish to have back, is still going to be Samuel. And I think that that's a part of, I don't know, the beauty of how the story ends up being told.
Well, because that's how all the characters feel. It's like if Samuel was around for the second half of the book, then he would just make it okay somehow.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But he's not. And so therefore some pretty ugly things happen that you feel like if this prophet was still around, then maybe he could have picked up the broken pieces. And to the extent that he is still around in Lee and in Adam, he does bring redemption to the story, but you do feel his loss. And that's some of the genius of the way the book is written.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's no more apparent. Nowhere is it more apparent than in his own family, and the way that they deteriorate after his death.
Well, let's talk about his family. Did you guys feel that was the kind of family that he would have? Did they ring true to you?
They did ring true to me. I think you have everybody adores Samuel. Everybody respects Liza. He left the kinds of holes that you would expect, and the kinds, depending on the character or the gifts of the kids, various resentments or various, just gaping wounds that. And there were whole kids too that came out. Olive seems to be whole.
Mm-hmm.
Joe, oddly enough, seemed to be whole. He went off and became a successful advertising guy, right? In New York.
Yeah, after going to Stanford.
Yeah, he was the babied one, the one that they all thought couldn't. It was funny where he wanted to go with them, and his mother didn't want him to, out when they were digging that one well. And then
he gets out there, and
his father gives him a book to read. Just read this. Don't touch anything.
That is one of the charming things about Liza, by the way, is that in spite of her sort of biblical staunchness, she does have weakness for her children, and it makes her a more rounded character. She's not just an old battle axe with a rolling pin that's going after her kids to work hard and catching her husband drinking and stuff like that. She understands that her one son is a dud and she loves him.
Yeah, I mean, you get the sense that a certain type of discipline is lacking in their home,
mm-hmm.
but that there's still happiness there. I mean, because Joe has no discipline.
Mm-hmm.
But they're the type of family, they would have all been expected to be clean and show up to the dinner table clean and well presented, and then just left free to do what they want.
Roam the hills and yeah.
Gaze at the stars.
Gaze at the stars.
Yeah.
So you've got George, he's the firstborn. He just ends up bland and boring, and we hardly find out a thing about him.
Yeah, he's sweet.
Right.
You find that out at the end, where Will is thinking of all his siblings.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't it Will? Or who is it? George's sweetness that he could bring to a room and his kindness. I don't know.
I don't remember.
And then you've got Will, who ends up conservative, down to earth, kind of alienated from his family.
And yet he does sort of carry his family along. You end up coming to find out that he ends up making sure...
He's the one that ends up paying for the funeral.
He makes sure all the bills are paid. He covers things, and nobody really knows about it. And he feels, despite how alienated, unaccepted he feels, everybody really does love Will and appreciate Will for what he is.
He rings very true to me. I think any family like this, there's always the kid that just feels like, I come from this family of weirdo eccentrics. My dad's a colorful, and I'm going to be the guy that's going to just go to college and make it work.
I'm the black sheep.
Yeah.
What I actually am is I'm the white sheep in a family of nothing but black sheeps in a sense. Black and white sheep doesn't really work for the Hamiltons.
I mean, yeah, he's a poet. He found the poetry on his table, and that scandalized him. And so there's some jealousy and resentment in Will, I think, towards his father's attachment to Tom and to the other children. But also Will, early on, it establishes him, he's the practical one. He always had kind of the Midas touch. Wealth came to him whether he wanted it or not.
Mm-hmm.
He was just a good, practical businessman. And he would let his anger get the best of him, so his siblings wouldn't listen to him, and his frustration, so his authority didn't come across. But his decisions were usually the right decisions.
Yeah,
Desi should not have gone back to Tom.
Adam should not have.
Yeah, the train was a bad idea.
Yeah.
He was right about the beans. He had wisdom, but no confidence. Almost.
Doesn't he tell Cal he's not married, right?
Yeah,
that's a little sad, and seems to me to reflect poorly on him, that there is something withdrawn and bitter about him, that he's not going to even continue his family's legacy. He's just going to make money and be practical and take care of his brothers and sisters as he needs to. And there's something noble in that, but I think maybe Steinbeck doesn't quite approve. And
no, I don't think he approves of Will. Will is lonely, and Will is withdrawn on purpose. There's the scene where he decides to eat in the chop house a steak by himself instead of going up and eating with Adam and his family.
Yeah,
and that was as much a business move as it was anything else.
But that's just the whole way he structures his life.
You really do get the sense that what Steinbeck really wants to do is contrast that materialistic, uber practical, businessy type with somebody who lived a richer, fuller life. May not have had money, but nobody was as rich as Sam Hamilton was, despite his poverty.
But then
and Will traded all of that in for a different kind of poverty.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, and then Steinbeck is wise enough, though, not to just make Will the villain, because you've got him contrasted with Tom, who is in many ways the opposite of Will and ends up just as tragically, if not more tragically, maybe a more poetical, beautiful kind of tragedy comes to Tom than Will's just slow, bland life. But what do we think about Tom and his relationship to his father, and how did Samuel fail Tom, or did Samuel fail Tom?
I'm not sure I can put words to all of it yet, but I can say that every time Steinbeck talked about Tom, especially early on, or he does these genealogical cycles where he'll introduce you and go through the line and tell you about everybody. Then he'll come back and he'll do it all over again, but he'll tell stories, and then he'll come back and do it all over again later. I think it's maybe the second time he does that where we get the picture of Tom. It was such a painful seeing Samuel's expectation of greatness laid upon Tom, seeing Tom sort of suffer under the weight of having a lot of Samuel's gifts. I just ached the whole time I read those scenes, and I think I'm still at a place where it's fresh enough that I don't quite know how to talk about it yet.
No, I understand.
Yeah, his father sees himself in Tom most of any of the other children. He's the poet. He's the inventive, creative one.
Yep.
Not in a way that Will's not. Will's a good businessman. Will doesn't like, though, to deal in uncertainties.
Tom's full of joy and sorrow.
Yeah. Highs and lows, very much. And there you get the scene where he dances with Desi when Desi comes back.
Yeah.
And that was a good picture into what their family life was like, that these children were willing to dance with one another and just have the...
Slap each other on the bottom out in the middle of the
train
street.
station
Yeah,
or whatever.
and he put all the letters and stuff. And he was playful in a way that his father was, too. But like Jake was saying, there's the whole weight of his father's expectations on his shoulder, and he can't.
Well,
he doesn't know if he can live up to it. This greatness that's inside of him.
The decision that he has to make to be great or to be normal, once that's placed on him, that's the thing that ultimately undoes him, right? Yeah, you almost get the sense that if I could be wrong, maybe you have a different take, but you almost get the sense that if Samuel had never said a word to Tom about deciding whether or not to become great or normal, Tom might have turned out just fine.
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the functions that Tom fulfills in the novel, if it's a series of Cain and Abel type stories and situations, and if we're looking at fathers playing favorites, it would be easy to say what's destructive about a father playing favorites is the person that doesn't get chosen as the favorite.
Yeah.
And so you have a couple examples of that. You've got Charles, and then you've got Cal, both of who are almost destroyed or maybe destroyed by their father picking the other one. But Tom's a good example of he's destroyed by his father picking him
as the favorite, as the successor.
Yeah, and you get that is a theme that carries
He's the
through
special one. And I mean, I was certainly thinking about one of my children as I read about Tom. You know, there are certain kids, it's amazing the way that they turn out. And my kids are still very young, but you get a sense of what their character is and maybe what they have in them or what potential they have in them. And you can't fail as a father to your sons, your kids, they're going to feel the weight of your expectations no matter how hard you try. It's a tough thing to not put undue yoke or burden on them, even from a very early age, to live up to what you think you see in them, whether it's real or not imagined, a function of your pride or your ambition for them.
And in Tom's case, it was, as far we don't get to see any of his poetry, but it seems like maybe he did have the material of greatness. I bet you Samuel wasn't wrong about him exactly.
No way.
But I think it was.
Who was Samuel ever wrong about?
No, nobody. I mean, he knew his kids.
And it's largely because he knew that he himself had that potential that was not necessarily squandered, but just set aside.
The wonderful thing about Samuel is that he didn't need to be great. He knew he could have been great, and he was comfortable just being a poor farmer and helping other people and letting his greatness live on through them. And he didn't give... I think maybe Samuel was failing, or one of them was that he never gave Tom the same capacity. Tom needed to be great, or Tom needed to die, and Tom made his choice.
I don't know that I would... I think that might be implicit. I think...
I don't know how much to blame Sam. I don't know that Samuel did anything.
I think Samuel really, really wanted Tom to be great, but I think he also would have been just fine if Tom would have settled for being a normal guy. I think he might have been a little disappointed. But
oh, absolutely. It's just too bad he couldn't have conveyed that to Tom. Somehow, maybe it was Tom's fault. Who knows whose fault it is? We don't get to see. But somehow Tom got the idea that he was supposed to be great.
Well, do we have one of the scenes where...
Samuel does say something to Tom. I mean, he does. He does at some point. I think maybe when they're working on the Trask's wells.
And also, I think there's something that happens after the Thanksgiving letter, right, where he talks to Tom, because Tom's the one who gives it to him, and he says something about, oh, they all wanted to lie and to make it where it wasn't obvious what they were trying to do, but Tom just wanted to tell him the truth.
Yeah.
Right, and he said, well, that's good. I expect that of you, son, because you have the greatness of soul. The truth matters so much to you that... So there were these things that continually happened between him and Tom where he was setting these expectations, but I'm not sure that it's completely Samuel's fault.
No, I'm not trying to blame him. I think
I'm agreeing with you because you said you weren't trying to blame him.
Okay, good. I think he probably bears some blame. I don't know what the extent of it is or what he could have done differently or how he could have known, but... what about the women, the Trask girls? So you've got
They're interesting.
Lizzie, Lizzie, who just not the Trask girls. I'm sorry. What about the women? The Hamilton girls. You've got Lizzie Hamilton, who just hates her family and only shows up for funerals after she gets away as quick as she can.
That's right. I forgot about her altogether.
Yeah, I don't remember hardly anything.
Because she's only mentioned, I think, in that very first chapter.
Yeah, it says that there was something in her past, right? But he didn't know what it was that had caused a separation between them, between her and her family. What's the oldest one who goes off to Portland or wherever she goes?
Oregon.
The one that dies, Una?
Yeah, is it Una?
Mm-hmm.
Una's the one whose death basically brings on
Undoes
Samuel's
Samuel.
death,
Yeah.
which is interesting too. So you've got Lizzie, who hates her family. That's interesting.
That's another, by the way, Una was his other favorite, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she ended up destroyed as much as Tom, up in a cabin. Her fingernails are broken and her
There were the
toes
signs
are,
of
toes are
hardship
mangled.
and stuff on her.
I hadn't thought of that before, but yeah, Samuel's favorites are undone in the same way that the Trask non-favorites are sort of undone.
Yeah, here's what's said about Lizzie. She early seemed to find a shame for her family. She was at funerals, and then she had a capacity for hatred and bitterness unique among the Hamiltons.
Mm-hmm.
So that's all you ever hear of her.
Right.
And then you have Una.
Well, it's interesting, at the very least, that Steinbeck, in this novel of the sins of the father being passed down and all this kind of family drama, he's willing to allow for the fact that some kids just end up different, Mm-hmm. I don't know what Samuel did or didn't do to Lizzie that made her that way, but some people just aren't digging it, and some people are, and that's just one of those weird things about life. Sometimes you can trace very clearly where something came from psychologically, and sometimes you just, who knows? Especially when you're telling an oral story that you've heard from your grandfather or whatever, and you don't have all the pieces. And then we've got Desi. Anybody have any interesting thoughts about Desi?
Well, Desi ends up playing sort of the same role that Sam does in the community, at least for a while, until she has her heart broken.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Why did she have her heart broken again?
She fell in love.
That's right.
She fell in love. It lasted for like a year, and then when it was done, she was done. But she was to the women of Salinas or King City or wherever it was, what Samuel was to the men.
Yeah.
The women would go there, and they would laugh, and they would come home, and they would be cheered, and the kids would be happy, and
The husband would be
would be very happy. And
I really like that description of, say, Mrs. Smith went to, and then Mrs. Smith comes back, and she's happy. And
He would make he would do the gesture or something, or touch her arm in a certain way.
the old signal.
Yeah, time to put the kids to bed, right?
But yeah, that's what the men went to Samuel, and
Yeah.
they came back happy, refreshed, filled up with new perspective on life. And
Yeah.
I think insofar, going back to Samuel as someone who somehow raised a bunch of kids that didn't turn out well, I think that aspect of it does ring true, that oftentimes prophets are easier to deal with from a distance, insofar as he is a prophet and a magnificent human being and a very colorful one. I mean, we've all seen examples of this in celebrities.
Samuel's kids don't, in Scripture, Samuel's kids don't turn out well.
Exactly. You see it all over the Scripture, too. King David's kids turn out like total crap. Except for that Solomon guy, turned out pretty well, I guess.
Except for the parts where he didn't.
Except for the parts where he didn't.
Parts where he...
So it's a very biblical. You can have a godly man, and a godly man that really helps a lot of people and does good, and his goodness lives on in a lot of people, and those people aren't the people that were closest to him. And I don't know why it works that way, but I think Steinbeck captures something true there. And not something that's 100% a mathematical. If you're great, therefore your kids will be destroyed. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying we've seen this dynamic play out before.
No, I mean, yeah, that dynamic plays out all the time in Scripture, and yet at the same time, the Bible does make it clear that the fruit of your kids is the first place to look for whether or not a man's good.
Which this book would also support. So then you have Olive, Steinbeck's mother. I assume he's telling real stories about his mother. You have that wonderful section about the airplane, which I would say is the number one section that I have no clue why it belongs in the novel, besides just that Steinbeck liked it, and I kind of like it too.
He was fond of his mother, and you see a lot of her mother in Olive, right? Very fastidious and very practical and very good at housekeeping. You get the sense that she was a good homekeeper and a good wife,
but looser and more free.
She had her father in her that she became a teacher, right?
Yeah, and a good one.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I read when I was looking through I just scanned Steinbeck's wiki page because I was curious about how much of the Hamilton stuff is real, and read about after going to Stanford, dropping out of Stanford, he went to New York and he took a job. So he's sort of like Joe in that sense, but then he ended up coming back and with his first wife, and Olive and Ernest put him up in a house and basically financed his first novel.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that always been very positive about him pursuing literature. Given I had wondered about his relationship to his mom and dad, just given the theme of the book.
Right. I didn't get deep into it, but it doesn't seem like he had any huge skeletons in the closet as far as his relationship with his father or anything that would make you think you would write a novel about fathers and sons not getting along.
Yeah, his parents seemed perfectly happy. As to whether or not he was a good husband is another question.
No,
he was married
he was
3 times
and had some affairs and stuff like that.
Yeah, he was no good.
Yeah.
Dirty, rotten scoundrel.
But he did manage to write this. He created Sam Hamilton, so there's something.
I think he understood what good and evil was to a certain extent.
Tim Schull.
Then you got Molly. She's just a lovely sweetheart, and I don't remember anything about her.
I don't remember a thing.
But she existed.
She's bright and happy.
Yeah.
Pretty. I think that's all you get of her, right?
Mm-hmm. So you guys both have big families.
I do.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
What do you take away from the Hamiltons? Is there anything that scares you reading about the Hamiltons or that encourages you reading about the Hamiltons?
Oh, I read through those Hamilton sections taking warning about, the whole thing, but thinking carefully about favoritism, thinking carefully about, I had all kinds of sentimental moments throughout the course of those things where I found myself wishing I could take every dandelion that my daughter had ever given me or every dumb little picture ripped out of a coloring book and just hold on to it forever. I had this sort of sentimental moments that you have from time to time as a father where you really just treasure the sweetness of your kids. You treasure their affection, and you also at the same time are regretting and repenting over how nasty you can be, how angry, how just unkind, untender with the weakness and fragility of your kids. And my oldest is 7 years old, so I've got a lifetime of both the sorrow and the joys of being a father ahead of me, but I hope I never lose the sweetness of those moments.
Yeah, similar for me. The thing that stood out with me, the warning is to be consistently and loving with your discipline in your home, because it's easy to lose sight of your children. But the even bigger warning for me wasn't so much a failure of Sam Hamilton's, it was the joy that he brought to his home, and just his big capacity to be the center of the life of his home, even for this wife who was organized and took great care of her house. He was
just alive and interested. And
he was her life too. Yeah. And he brought life to her and he brought life to his children. And then to realize that he just took up that responsibility and that care, and day in and day out, he was big and joyful and happy. And then just how easy it is to be angry and depressed and bitter at home, and just
to be a
realize,
ghost like Adam was.
Yeah. And to realize that the whole happiness of your home doesn't necessarily depend on your wife and your children. It depends on you. And that was one of the big things I took away from the Hamilton family.
Today's episode of The Bookening was written and produced by me, Nathan Alberson. It was performed by Nathan Alberson, Brandon Chasteen, and Jacob Menzel. If you want more awesome content like this, go to warhornmedia.com. There's articles, there's music, there's more episodes of this amazing podcast, and just all kinds of cool stuff at warhornmedia.com. Cool stuff by me and my friends and work acquaintances.